How far is each current playoff team? How far can they actually go in the playoffs? That is the question that every fan base wants the answer to. How far can the Bills make it after a loss to the Rams? How good are the Steelers really? Is it really the Lions' year? And can the Commanders make a run? In this live stream, I'm going to break down the AFC, the NFC, all 7 seeds that currently stand in the playoffs today as of Monday, December the 9th, and provide you my thoughts on the strengths and the limitations of a potential playoff run. So let me know in the live comment section what you guys think about each team, if you agree with me or if you disagree on my stance on how realistically far each team can make it. And I'm going to be brutally honest. If I don't think you're going to win a playoff game, I'm going to let you know I don't think you're going to win a playoff game. So let's get started with the NFC. And how we're going to operate here is we're going to work our way from seed 7 up to seed 1 in each conference, beginning with the NFC conference, which is, of course, the number 7 seed right now, a team that we didn't really get to watch on Sunday. That's the Washington Commanders. The Commanders, I'm going to be honest, I don't see you winning a playoff game. I'm sorry, Washington. Now, you might just say, Mitch, you've been hating on the Commanders and Jaden Daniels all season. You've never ever believed in us. So why should I believe in you? Well, first of all, I think the matchup is an issue. When you think about the 7 seed, and let's be fair, I don't think the Commanders will make the playoffs anywhere above the 7 seed. So you're going to have to face the Eagles or the Lions in the first round of the playoffs. And just given how the Commanders, as a talent on their football team, as a roster, they just don't stack up to the Eagles or the Lions on the road with a rookie quarterback. There's a reason rookie quarterbacks don't typically play that well or fare that well in the playoffs. First of all, they're usually wild card teams. They're usually playing in a hostile environment on the road against better football teams. And they're usually having to overcome a talent deficiency. That's typically the case. And with Washington, that would certainly be the case for Jaden Daniels against Jalen Hurts' Eagles or Jared Goff's Detroit Lions. So that matchup alone is really frustrating. But then I think Washington's flaws become exposed against better teams. Offensively, I think teams realize that they don't exactly have the greatest skill talent. Outside of Terry McLaurin, I feel like teams understand that if they actually make these players beat them outside of Terry McLaurin, they can expose this offense. If the Washington Commanders can't run the ball consistently and it forces them to be in longer down and distance, specifically second and third down, it's harder for them to gain traction offensively. This is very much an offense that's dictated by early down success. Their screens, their run game. If they have success in that area, they can have success and move the football. But if Jaden Daniels is limited to the drop back passing setting, where some of his limitations as a rookie will be exposed against better defenses, that's where the offense could have a tough time, specifically if they fall behind in a game, because defensively, they have a problem against the run. They're 27th in yards per attempt allowed this season. They are not a good football team against the run. And if that matchup is the Eagles or the Lions, those are arguably the 2 best rushing teams in the NFL, which makes falling behind that much more crucial and gaining a lead that much more important. So, yeah, the smoke and mirrors of the offense could be exposed against better personnel, better teams, and the defense could be exposed by a physical offense on the other side. So my ceiling is truly just a wild card exit. We have 72% of people saying that that is probably what's going to happen to the Commanders, which is still a great season, though. Let's highlight that fact. If the Commanders make the playoffs and lose a competitive wild card game, even not a competitive let's say they lose by 20, I still think that's a successful season for the Washington Commanders, a 24% divisional round vote as well. I could see it, but the only way I would say is third time playing the Eagles, anything can happen. If they play the Eagles and it's the third matchup, You know them very well. Maybe you get a couple turnovers to go your way. Maybe you jump on the Eagles early. You force them to play off their script. That could help them, the Commanders win that game. So let's get to the next team, which is the number 6 seeded currently, which is crazy because this team feels much better than a 6 seed. The Green Bay Packers are the number 6 seed. I have their potential or their realistic solution to the playoffs being an NFC Championship loss. Now, obviously, they could drop out far before this because they're going to be a 6 seed playing a 3 seed, or they're going to be a 5 seed playing a 4 seed. So what that means is they have to play on the road, first of all. But the Packers have shown in the playoffs that they can go on the road and win, right? Last year, they went on the road to Dallas, a number 2 seed in that playoff format. They were the 7 seed. They walked into Dallas. They blew out the Cowboys. I feel like they have enough experience in that regard to get the job done. We also just saw them walk into Detroit, play a very competitive game that they definitely could have won. There was positives to take away from that game offensively. There were negatives to take away from that game defensively. So they have positives. They have negatives. They're explosive on offense. Their offensive line is very good. They can run the football. And defensively, I feel like they're opportunistic. And they're well coached and they're well prepared. And I feel like against any opponent in the NFC, they could walk into any building and win. And the reason for that is they're a cold weather team that's used to bad weather. But the way their roster is constructed, you think of Reed, a quick, shifty wide receiver, Christian Watson, one of the fastest players at wide receiver in football. You think about the speed they have on offense and defense, but then also the environment they play in. So they can go on the road in a bad weather. They can go on the road in a dome. And I feel like they have a chance to win in either environment. Now, why I say NFC Championship and I don't see a Super Bowl is because I think they're still a little youthful. I still think they're a little bit less talented than Philadelphia or Detroit. I think that showed up against Detroit in this past week on Thursday night, where Detroit has a lot of injuries on defense. Detroit could have been exposed, but Green Bay just all around as a well-rounded football team. Yes, they had injuries as well, just couldn't put it all together. Defensively, they couldn't make those stops in the secondary where they're actually 32nd in drop back pass defense, according to EPA. So they have a major flaw at cornerback. They have a flaw in terms of consistency rushing the quarterback. And they're kind of missing a third down chain mover offensively. Do they have a lot of talented guys that bring a lot to the table? Reed from the slot, Watson outside. They didn't have Romeo Doubs. Kraft has been an interesting tight end. And obviously Jacobs is a borderline offensive player of the year candidate. They have a lot to be intrigued by, but it feels like they don't have that A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown in the NFC, Justin Jefferson type. They don't have that type of player that on the biggest down of the game, Jordan Love can just drop back. He's going to look at that matchup and he's going to go to that matchup with the football. So that's also something that I think really does lessen their potential in the playoffs. So NFC Championship loss is probably as far as they would go because I think they could beat Detroit or Philly, but both would probably be a pretty difficult task. So the Packers, that's my potential. And divisional round is going to get the most percentage of votes, 51%. 23% for the wild card, 16% for the conference championship, 10% for the Super Bowl. So definitely a wide range of outcomes for this football team for sure. Coach says Niners are not dead yet. They're not dead yet, but we will not be discussing them in the video. AJ Brown saying that the passing game needs work is stating facts about the Eagles. We'll get to the Eagles. Jordan Love better than Jalen Hurts. I don't necessarily disagree, but the team is a little bit different. Packers won't make it past the wild card round. My goodness. We also got in the chat, Packers run defense is trash. Actually, the Packers run defense is ranking top 10 against yards per attempt allowed. They're actually top 10. I didn't think their run defense was that bad against Detroit. I kind of felt like, yeah, they got overpowered a little bit, but their pass defense, I think, is actually the bigger problem, which hurts their run defense. Jacobs is legit. Jordan Love is proving he can be a great playoff quarterback. Jordan Love, the thing about him and the potential of the Packers is that he has such high-level plays, right? That throw to Kraft on Thursday night for the touchdown. Like, he has these high-level moments where he can just put together a game where he is superb and he's on fire. Kind of like what we saw from Matthew Stafford against the Buffalo Bills, where it's just like, obviously, Jordan Love's not a Hall of Fame quarterback like Stafford, but he has those moments, those plays. He can string together a game of just absolute dime after absolute dot. So that's why I do like the Packers in a playoff setting because of that. Moving to the number 5 seeded NFC team, we've got the Minnesota Vikings. Still currently, I believe, with only 2 losses, which is absolutely ridiculous for a 5 seed. Now, I have the Vikings. This was controversial of me. I have them as a divisional round exit, which I was contemplating. I was thinking about NFC Championship as their absolute peak. But to me, like, NFC divisional round, I think is more realistic. And the reason for that is I just feel like the Vikings, unlike the Packers, are a much better team when they play at home. I think the Vikings are so much more of a home-based team. We've seen them play their best games this season across the board at home. You think about all their best wins this season, whether it was against a healthier Niners team early in the year, destroying the Texans early in the year, playing toe-to-toe, drive for drive against Detroit at home. The game they just played against Atlanta at home. Now, the problem is the Vikings do not play at home, right? They're going to have to go on the road because it's very unrealistic that they do surpass the Lions in the division. It just is. And currently, as it stands, they would be the 5th seed. So Sam Darnold has actually played really, really well. He has 11 touchdown passes without an interception in the last month of football games. Last 4 games, 11 touchdowns, right? He had 5 against the Atlanta Falcons. But not every day are you going to be facing a pass rush quite like the Falcons that literally never touch you on any single play. So I do feel like Darnold is always up for a catastrophic performance. I do feel that way. If you can get around him, pressure him a little bit, especially without Christian Darrisaw on that left side. He does take too many sacks as it stands already, and he did against Atlanta. And I feel like if you can get around him, you can force some mistakes. I think we see a defense in Minnesota that is good, that is very good against the run, but you can certainly move the ball. I mean, even against the Falcons, they conceded a lot of yards. It comes down to, can you not turn it over, and can you convert on 3rd down and in the red zone, which a lot of teams have had difficulty with. But I think the best teams in the NFC that will be able to run the ball a little bit on Minnesota, let's say the Eagles or the Lions, maybe even the Packers, a team that could play them potentially, but that would probably only take place in the NFC Championship. And then the other thing with the Vikings is, would they be a lock to go to Tampa and win, right? Because they have to go on the road. Would that be necessarily a game that you would say, oh, I'm going to take Sam Darnold over Baker in his place? I don't necessarily know if that's like a lock, so they definitely could lose in the wild card, but as good as the Vikings have been, as well coached as they are, they're balanced on offense. They have great receivers. I feel like they could upset the Lions in the divisional round. It's very possible. So it's a very hard team to predict. Because I think depending on which Sam Darnold you get in a given week, they could be explosive offensively. They can be explosive defensively. They can put together and piece together a perfect game plan offensively, right? Justin Jefferson can make like 3 catches that just blow your mind on 3rd down or in the red zone where it's like, well, how do I defend that? Kind of like Puka Nacua against the Buffalo Bills, where it's like, I don't care who's playing that game. Like he's gonna catch it, and it's just like, you win this game. So the Vikings are tricky because I feel like their spectrum is all over the place, but I do ultimately decide divisional round is probably the most likely exit for them, especially given their home road splits, in my opinion, right? They lost to the Rams on the road. Like, that was one of the better teams they played on the road. They lost. So Big Cam says the Vikings still have a great shot at the divisional round. Definitely think that. I definitely would favor them going to Seattle, which they'll play soon, actually in Seattle. So that will be interesting. And they also probably would be favored in Tampa Bay, but I don't necessarily think it would be a lock. That being said, you would favor them, which would mean they'd likely get to the divisional round. Once it gets to the divisional round, they'll probably play Detroit. Probably. I mean, maybe not, because if Green Bay wins their matchup, then they'd probably be going to Philadelphia, which would be intriguing. But again, I don't know. That's just tough. Austin says Darnold is not overrated. I never said he was overrated. I don't know if somebody else said. I don't think he's overrated at all. I think, if anything, he's underrated. I just think that he's inconsistent. I think he's inconsistent. He played amazing against Atlanta. I will say that. He was unbelievable. Darnold gets happy feet. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, even at his best, he sees ghosts. Isn't that the iconic Monday Night Football game against my Patriots? It's like, he sees ghosts. Sometimes he doesn't. He sees guys around him that aren't around him. He makes bad mistakes. So that can turn a playoff game, and you never know when that's going to happen. All right, at the number 4 spot, let's just check the poll real quick. 45% say the divisional round. So you guys agree with me. That sounds good. All right, number 4, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who would be right now the champs of the NFC South. And I'm thankful for that, because I think, as we've seen over the last few weeks, Tampa is better than the Falcons, and they have a better track record against superior NFC foes, NFL foes in general, right? Remember, Tampa Bay has defeated Detroit and Philadelphia. It doesn't matter who is hurt, who is not hurt. They did both of those things. All right, so I'm just going to point that out. And that's why I feel like they're probably max exit. They'd probably win a playoff game and lose in the divisional round. That being said, the team they would face in the divisional round is the Eagles or the Lions, who they've beaten both of those teams. And especially against the Eagles, they kind of own the Eagles. I mean, let's be fair. They kind of own the Eagles. I don't know why, but they kind of own the Eagles. So that being said, this game would be in Philadelphia, right? Because they did play them earlier this year, destroyed the Eagles, wiped them off the face of the planet in Tampa Bay, and they absolutely wrecked them in the wild card round. And I think the reason they own them is because of how Todd Bowles' defense and his schematics match up with Jalen Hurts specifically. And they're also typically very good against the run, which has been Philadelphia's bread and butter. But just pointing that out. Now, the reason I think they max out at the divisional round is defense. They're 31st in pass attempts faced. So clearly they have an identifiable flaw, pass defense. Now, that's why they actually kind of match up well with the Eagles, because the Eagles don't throw the football. They're last in pass attempts. Okay. And they never change their style for anybody, right? But Tampa Bay, if a team just comes out and throws it 40 times, they're probably going to lose if you have a decent defense. That's the problem, because their pass defense, especially in the middle of the field, is extremely flawed. They're 28th in first downs allowed. They're 31st in drop back pass success rate defensively. They're one of the worst teams against the pass. You can get consistent gains against them. You can keep them out of those third downs where Todd Bowles can be creative and blitz you. And then if you can get ahead of them, it's going to force their offense out of whack as well. So, yeah, their offense is good. Baker's been awesome, but Baker is prone to a couple turnovers as well. You know, especially lately, he's been throwing more interceptions than you would think. So I do think this is the best Tampa offense we've seen since like 2021, though. I will say that. So Tampa can win a shootout. Tampa can win a game where we're tossing interceptions back and forth, and we're playing a little risky on third down, and you know they can hit you with the blitz, things like that. Which is why if they faced Minnesota, it would be almost like Minnesota or Tampa playing themselves. You know what I mean? They both play similar defensively. Minnesota is a better version. And I do feel like Baker's the better quarterback over Sam Darnold. I do feel like the O-line of Tampa is better. And I do feel like Tampa would have the home field, which is also a big deal against Minnesota. So that I feel like they could win that game. It'd probably be very, very close. So it's a flip of a coin either way, which is why I've kind of decided with Minnesota and Tampa that they could lose in the divisional round, but they could also win a wild card game. Right? So, but the thing about Tampa is they have experience. They have champions. They have Super Bowl winners. They have that playoff mentality. And they have a quarterback who's an absolute gamer. And they've played, up against the best this year and played extremely well. Detroit, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Kansas City, They've played a lot of really good teams this year, and they've played pretty well in those games overall. Baker makes too many mistakes in the playoffs. I don't know. I mean, he played really well last playoffs, I thought. I thought he played really well against the Eagles. I thought he played really well against Detroit. He might make too many mistakes. It's entirely possible, which is what I brought up, but I don't think you can necessarily point out his playoff resume as a reason why that is the case. I think more so his lately regular season resume, if that's what you're talking about. T-Ram says Tampa has never played Philly in the cold. That is true. I will say that a lot of these players on Tampa Bay did play in that cold NFC Championship game in Green Bay in 2021 or 2020 season, 2021 NFC Championship. A lot of the defenders, especially Mike Evans, Tristan Wirfs, some of the offensive linemen. So I feel like they kind of have a little bit of a physicality. I don't necessarily feel like they would be just ran over. That being said, Tampa's run defense is worse than past seasons, which doesn't exactly travel well when you're facing Detroit or Philly. But at the end of the day, I just don't think they would be able to win a rematch against Detroit or Philly. I really don't, unless things went their way in terms of turnovers and things like that. I thought they were fortunate to beat Detroit the first time. If you look at the box score, you look at the yardage difference, things like that. The Philadelphia game, Philly was extremely injured, right? They were also at home in that game. Philly hadn't quite figured out their identity behind Saquon Barkley yet. There's a lot of reasons for that loss, but I wouldn't rule it out. I'm just going to say I wouldn't rule it out. The number 3 seed in the NFC, and let's check the poll. Oh, it's down. All right. Number 3 seed. Oh, we got 55% on the wild card, 34% in the divisional round. So it's pretty split. Okay. It's pretty split. Number 3 seed, we've got the Seattle Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks currently are winning the NFC West. I actually kind of feel like the Seahawks would have the 3rd greatest chance in the NFC West of winning a playoff game. Maybe that's crazy of me to say, because right now, as it stands, they're 8-5 and they're the best team in this division, and they swept the Cardinals. And they recently beat the Niners in San Francisco, which is something that I never thought they would have done, they would have done previously. But I just think there is too much inconsistency, especially offensively, not as much defensively. I think they've grown defensively. They've certainly become dominant in some areas, especially in their interior defensive line. I love their cornerback combination. Love's great. Ernest Jones is really upgraded linebacker, but offensively, they're very inconsistent. They're very flawed. And then you combine that with the fact that this is the worst Seahawks team at home that I've ever seen in my life. Seattle at home this year is not the threat that they used to be, even when they were an underdog entering the playoffs. Remember that Saints playoff game with Marshawn Lynch? That was always the threat, because Seattle was loud and Seattle was a dangerous place to play, and you had to go to the Pacific Northwest, and it was kind of an awkward place to play, and there could be rain, and Seattle in the Legion of Boom days was impossible to win there, right? Even in the Matt Hasselbeck days. But to me, right now, you can win there. Everybody's won there. You can walk in there and you can win. The New York Giants beat the Seattle Seahawks this season in Seattle. So Seattle just doesn't have that same feel. So even though they play at home, I don't think there's that fear. Secondly, I just kind of have more faith in a team like the Rams or San Francisco, given their playoff track records and their coach, that they would be able to win a playoff game over Seattle. And Seattle's offensive line, I don't have any trust in them. I don't have any trust in them, man. They don't give Geno enough time. Last game against Arizona, a team that doesn't have a great 4-man rush, a team that has to send a lot of blitzes to get home, sure. But let's say they're playing, we're going to see the matchup. They're playing Minnesota. You've got to block Van Ginkel and Grenard more consistently than whatever Arizona's throwing out at you. And you've got a very creative front that can really mix things up on Geno Smith. And you've got some really talented offensive playmakers. And you've got balance on that side of the ball. I don't know, man. And you've also got Kevin O'Connell calling plays I feel like that's a bit of a mismatch, in my opinion. So, or you've got the Green Bay Packers, who have Matt LaFleur and a team that's been to the playoffs and won, and a team that can run the ball on you, probably, that can create explosives, that's used to playing in bad weather. So you don't really have that advantage. So I think Seattle is probably the most unlikely team to advance in the NFC playoffs. It's debatable between them and the Commanders. Debatable. It depends. The one game that Seattle can win is a high octane, kind of like, I think, two different games they can win. They can win a pass first game where they're just spamming throws and they're throwing the ball like 40 times and Geno Smith is just on one. Or they can win a game where their defense is just making it super gritty and super difficult, and Geno just goes on some like 3 drives in the game where he's just throwing laser beams. They can win that type of game, or they can win the other type of game. But it feels like if their O-line just isn't in it that day, they can't really run the ball. It just feels like they're too inconsistent offensively and their defense won't be able to hold up. Their defense is not elite, right? It's good. It's not elite. They can't carry them to playoff success against the best teams in football. So, and maybe they just play well against Arizona. Like, have we ever thought about that? Maybe they just play well against Arizona. The people in the chat say 57% in the wild card exit, 27 divisional round, 10% conference, and 6% Super Bowl. There must be some Seahawks fans in the chat. Lost Kenneth Walker, but they have a crazy 3 wide receiver combo. They do. There's always the potential of, some big plays by DK Metcalf, some big plays by JSN, some big plays by Tyler Lockett. That's always possible. It's always possible. If the Seahawks stay in, they get exposed early. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, Hayden. I'm sorry. The defense is playing out of their minds, and the Hawks have rushed for 100+ 3 straight weeks. The defense is playing out of their minds. I don't disagree, but who have they played? That's like elite. That's like really good in the NFC. We're going to see, because they play the Packers, they play the Vikings coming up. So we'll get a better sense of that moving forward, but I don't quite believe in them enough. The number 2 seeded NFC team is the Philadelphia Eagles. And this one might be a little controversial. I have them as a Super Bowl loss. Now you're going to ask me, Mitch, if they make the Super Bowl, don't they have the chance of winning a Super Bowl? I just don't see it. I don't know why. I just can't see the Eagles holding the Super Bowl trophy in their hands. I don't see it. I don't see Nick Sirianni with the Super Bowl. I don't see Jalen Hurts with the Super Bowl. I think their ceiling is exactly what happened in 2022. They go to the Super Bowl. It's probably a really fun game, but they lose. And I think there's enough reasons for concern. Now, that being said, they are fantastic defensively this year, and they are arguably the best running football team in the sport. So you have those 2 options to their team, and they're one of the most talented teams in football. They're one of the most well-rounded rosters in football. But there is actually a very underrated deficiency to this team. The Eagles are scoring 1.3 offensive points per game in first quarters. 1.3. Now, to put into context how bad that is, that ranks 792nd out of 796 teams since 2000. That is one of the 5 worst teams in scoring points in the first quarter since 2000. That is not good, in case you were wondering. So this is my problem. This is a team that doesn't score in the first quarter, and they attempt the least amount of passes in football. They run the ball more than anybody. So they put so much pressure on their defense to be unbelievable in the first quarter of the game. Now imagine if they're playing a team that strings together a great script like Tampa, or has really good playmakers like the Vikings, or has a really balanced offense like the Packers, or is one of the best offenses in football like the Lions, and they get behind in the game. They could lose in the NFC playoffs because they are not a pass-first team. Their drop-back passing game is not very good. Jalen Hurts as a drop-back passer when he cannot rely on the run is just not that good, especially this year. They just don't have a very big, exposure to, okay, throw it 40 times and win. We haven't really seen that this year from this football team. And then in the Super Bowl, it feels like that would just be magnified even more because the flaws of your football team are magnified even more. A team will have 2 weeks to prepare for Saquon. A team will have 2 weeks to find ways to get after Jalen Hurts. A team will have 2 weeks to find maybe a few different plays that can scheme up against this good defense. And what happens if you're facing Mahomes, Allen, Lamar in the Super Bowl? They're going to score. They're going to get ahead. And you're going to have to play from behind. So ultimately, yes, they're very talented. Yes, they're very balanced. I feel like the Super Bowl is as far as they can go. And I don't see them winning the Super Bowl, honestly. Conference championship, 49% people believe. I could see them beating the Lions in the conference championship. I could see them winning the conference championship. I think that's possible. Putting out a solution for that, I would say, is the Lions. You look at their defensive flaws, their defensive injuries, the amount of man coverage that they play. It makes it simple for the Eagles to throw the football because they play a ton of man and they blitz a lot. It's not a good idea when you've got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith on the outside that can win one-on-ones, right? And they can run the football, so it forces Detroit to kind of overcompensate in that regard. So I feel like Philly can move the ball. On the other side, Philly has a very good defense. They're very stout up front, and Vic Fangio is a very good defensive coordinator. I feel like he could slow down Jared Goff a little bit. We've seen Fangio, give Goff some issues in the past as well. So I do feel like they could beat the Lions, but especially if it is the Lions in the conference championship, and I feel like they can beat anybody else. I think you would agree. But once it gets to the Super Bowl, I'm not sure, man. So that's our number 2 seed, the Philadelphia Eagles. 29% say the Super Bowl. All right. Let's get to the number 1 seed. That is the Detroit Lions. The Lions, I have as the Super Bowl champs. I think that's as far as they can go. Obviously, they can lose before that. That doesn't mean this is my prediction. I'm just saying that this is kind of as realistically far as they can go. I think they can win the Super Bowl. And the reason I say that is I think first and foremost what comes to mind is their coaching. I think that Ben Johnson right now is the best play caller in the NFL. And when you have right now the best play caller, that's above Kyle Shanahan. That's high praise. That's above Sean McVay, right? That's above Matt LaFleur. The best play caller in football. They have the best O-line in football. So they protect Jared Goff. They run the football exceptionally well. Goff is, I think, a much better drop back passer than Jalen Hurts. I think just his accuracy, his timing, his decision-making, his ability to step up, manipulate the pocket, make throws, especially at the intermediate level. They have a bunch of different playmakers at different positions. Jameson Williams has become a real threat on the outside. Tim Patrick has become something. Obviously, they have St. Brown, they have Laporta, they have Gibbs, they have Montgomery. They can overpower you and they can out-finesse you, which is something that I think a Super Bowl champion needs offensively. They can score. Defensively, they're exceptional against the run. They never get overpowered. They never allow you to run the ball on early downs and dictate success, which always puts you on your heels. You have to throw the ball to beat the Lions, which is a limited vision for how do you win a game. And I really feel like, it would have to take an exceptional run offense to be able to move the ball on the ground, which may be Philly, right? Like maybe Philly. But when it looks at Minnesota, Tampa, Seattle, Green Bay, even Green Bay struggled a little bit to run the ball, and it took a lot of defensive line injuries, right? Green Bay is like a top 5 running team in football, and they were kind of inconsistent running the ball. And Jordan Love had to make some big throws. Now, their defense right now is susceptible because they have a ton of injuries. And that's why I think they have a little bit of fragility to their team because their secondary is a little beat up, their linebackers a little beat up, their D-line's a little beat up. If they have all these defensive injuries, that gives them exposure to lose shootouts because they can't really rush the quarterback all that well. If you're able to attack them with good wide receivers against their corners and a lot of man coverage, you can beat them, right? So they have that fragility of injury. They also have the fragility of fourth down play. What if Dan Campbell, like he did against the Packers, goes for it at his own 30-yard line, leading by 3 points, and they don't make it? And then it gives the team the momentum. What if they go for it on 4th down and 1 with the chance to end the game and they don't make it against Green Bay and they get stopped and the Packers drive down and score a field goal? What if that happens? That's possible because of the aggression they have. It's their identity. But as we saw against the 49ers in the NFC Championship last year, their identity lost them the game. They were too aggressive. They were playing from ahead, and instead of taking points, they were too aggressive. Hopefully they learn from that to a certain degree. So I think the fragility at which they play defensively and on fourth down would have them lose games, but at the same time, they're exceptionally coached. They're very good against the run, and they're very, very good on offense. And I think Goff is good enough to win a Super Bowl, especially given how the AFC looks this year. So 77% have the Super Bowl as the ceiling, 18% conference championship, 5% divisional round. Interesting that only 5% see them losing in the divisional round. It would be interesting, though. Coach Laxer says when healthy, Lions are a full team, no weaknesses. It is interesting to me, though, that the Lions are a team that could play a divisional foe in the divisional round. Like, they could face Minnesota or Green Bay in that divisional round, which I think is just like an opportunity to lose in the first game. It is an opportunity because of how familiar those teams are with Detroit. Let's get to the AFC. First of all, we have the 7 seed, which is the Denver Broncos. For the Broncos, I think it's similar to the Washington Commanders. It's a wild card exit for me, just because, again, rookie quarterback, exceptionally well-coached team, great offensive line. I think low-key one of the best in football. A defense that's far exceeded expectations. But when you look at Denver and you look at who they've played and who they've beaten and who they've lost to, you don't really see a good team on their schedule that they have defeated. Right? Seattle, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, the Chargers. You go through their schedule. You go through the teams they faced. Baltimore, they were blown out. They haven't really beaten a good team. So to me, they feel fraudulent because of that. They feel like a team that's capable of beating bad teams because they're better coached. They don't make mistakes. Bo Nix doesn't put the ball in jeopardy. Defensively, they're very solid. But even Jameis showed that defense maybe has some concerns in terms of their depth in their secondary, things of that nature. So for me, it's pretty simple. If you're relying on Bo Nix to beat a great team, the way that he is currently playing, he's more of a game manager, not a guy that can go above and beyond. I just don't see how Denver wins. I actually think the best case would be they play Kansas City and it's like a defensive game and it's like the first game they played in a 17-16 and they have a chance to win at the end. That's maybe their best opportunity to win a game, to be honest, because they would be the 7 seed and they're likely facing the Chiefs or the Bills, right? 75% have it as a wild card exit, 16% in the divisional round, 3% conference championship, 6% Super Bowl. All right. Let's get to the number 6 seed, which is the Los Angeles Chargers. I have the Chargers losing in the divisional rounds, or this is the max I think they can go. And I think the difference between the Chargers and the Broncos, both teams are well coached. One team has Justin Herbert. One team has Bo Nix. I think that's the difference, where Herbert, I feel like he could go to Pittsburgh and outplay Russell Wilson and win. Don't think that's too unrealistic, right? I think Herbert can have one of those games where he's just nuclear. He's just unbelievable. He just makes every throw. He can put the team on his back. It doesn't even matter if he's throwing to Stone Smart, right? Like, he didn't have Lad McConkey last night against the Chiefs. Nearly pulled that one off. Defensively, they're strong. They don't make a lot of mistakes. They don't take a lot of penalties. It feels like they can go on the road and they can compete with good football teams. It feels like they're physical up front. They're not a great running football team. That's not the case, but they're physical, right? So I feel like they're not the typical Charger team where they're soft and they're dependent on playing at home and they're warm-weathered. Not really. I just think they're not talented enough to go beyond the divisional round. I think they lack some talent on the interior defensive line. They lack some talent at cornerback. They lack some talent, especially at wide receiver and running back. So Dobbins comes back, Ladd McConkey comes back. It still feels like they're a little bit limited against the Bills or the Chiefs. They're a little bit limited against those top teams. The Ravens have more talent. The Steelers have more talent. The Texans have more talent. Pretty much every team in the AFC besides the Broncos, they would have more talent than the Chargers. That being said, the Chargers can coach with anybody. They have a great defensive coordinator. They have a very good head coach that's won a lot of games and a lot of playoff games and championships in college. They have an excellent quarterback, so they can win a game in the playoffs. I just don't think they can go beyond that. If you think Herbert is coming to Pittsburgh and win, you're crazy. The defense is going to smother them. It's possible, man, because their defense is good on the other side. So if the game is at the 17-17 in the fourth quarter, which quarterback are you going to want in that situation? And you think about it, Chargers offensive line fully healthy. You've got two excellent tackles that can protect Herbert. If he's got time, we've seen the Steelers can be passed on, right? Like, you can move the ball that way. So just throwing out that Texans matchup, but they could also play, or the Steelers matchup. They could also play the Texans, in which I feel like their D-line, the pass rush of the Chargers could come through and have a big game as well. So moving to the number 5 seed, that's the Baltimore Ravens. I think as far as they can go is the AFC title, and I think they'd probably lose in the AFC Championship. And the reason for that is they have two separate flaws. They have two exceptional strengths, which is their rush offense is incredible. Their run defense is very solid. And obviously Lamar is fantastic. But beyond that, their defense is very inconsistent, if not bad outright, as a pass defense. And their drop back pass game is not as good as some others. I mean, Lamar has never been known for the ability to throw it 40 times and win a playoff game. And that's always been a flaw of the Ravens when falling behind in playoff games. They've struggled to come back. And just I think there's also something in the back of my mind of like the Ravens in the playoffs, just with Lamar, Lamar just doesn't play his best football. There's something there as well. That being said, if you don't think this team can win multiple playoff games, I think you're kind of foolish because, I think, and Tucker's another flaw. I mean, Tucker keeps missing kicks. So at the end of the day, if Justin Tucker is not Justin Tucker and the game comes down to a game-winning kick or he missed one earlier in the game, that can be really catastrophic to your chances. It really can be. So I think you can throw the football on the Ravens. I think you can create explosive plays on the Ravens. Those are flaws. That being said, could they go to Houston and win the way that the Texans have been inconsistent as well? Certainly, right? Could they go to even Kansas City where they lost by a toe? They beat the Bills, right? They beat the Bills. They beat them down. Now this time it would be in Buffalo. It might be snowing. It might be a little weird, but they are a physical football team. I feel like they can travel on the road. They do have plenty of experience from that head coach and quarterback spot in these spots. And then could they beat the Steelers? It's a divisional rival. They definitely could beat the Steelers, right? That game will come down to a field goal, very likely. So the Ravens ranking number 27 in combined defense and special teams right now in EPA is their biggest flaw. But offensively, they're as explosive as anybody. They can score as many points as anybody when they're clicking, when they're on, especially if they can get ahead. Okay. So that's why I have the Ravens as AFC Championship. Super Bowl, 19%. I could see them going to the Super Bowl. It would take an incredible improvement by their special teams and their defense. They would have to they would probably have to go to Buffalo, beat Buffalo in some sort of shootout. And then they would probably have to go to Kansas City and in a slugfest somehow beat the Chiefs. And their defense would have to be way better than we've seen it on a consistency basis against the Chiefs to win that game. So that's where I'm kind of a little bit down on the Ravens, but 46% conference championship. So you guys mostly agree with me. Divisional round, 31%. Evan says, I think conference championship. Angel says, what do you say about the Eagles? You can scroll. I don't know if you can scroll back or you can check this video out on YouTube later on or the post replay later on. Evan says, Lions are winning the Super Bowl. Lions we talked about. All right, let's get to the next team, guys. We already talked about the NFC. You can watch it back later on. Number 4 seed is the Houston Texans. The Texans were tricky because the Texans was a team I was very high on before the year. And there's moments that you see them play at a very high level. You think of the games against the Bills and the Lions, right? Where against top level opponents, it seems like they play better. And against bad opponents, they play worse. And the Texans, they play tight games, kind of like the Chiefs, just a worse version in almost every game they play, no matter who the opponent is. So that's a little bit weird about Houston. But I have them as a divisional round exit just because I can't get over all the flaws of the Texans right now. Like, do the Texans have an argument to go on a little bit of a run? Sure, because we've seen Stroud play at a very high level. We know what Nico Collins and Joe Mixon can do, and we know the defense is top 5 in the NFL, especially their pass rush is exceptional. So we know that they have that potential, but given their offensive line flaws, they have the worst offensive line in the AFC playoffs, and I don't know if it's that close. Like, they give up way too many pressures, way too many sacks, way too many hits on CJ Stroud. It doesn't allow him to be in a rhythm. Their offensive play calling is suspect, to say the least, this year. And they take so many penalties. Now, maybe penalties would be a little bit less in the playoffs because refs are a little bit more inclined to not call things. But it feels like their coaching, whether it be D'Amico or Slowick, has let them down this year. Stroud has regressed this year. And their offensive line has been so terrible. So it feels like they would need to play in a defensive game, which is entirely possible. But it would be more difficult if they're facing the Ravens. They're going to have to score when they play the Ravens. That being said, we know that Stroud, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins can maybe make some explosive passes against the Ravens because that's their deficiency. But they would have to hold up in pass protection, which is something that we can't really expect them to do because they haven't been able to do it all year. So the Texans are frustrating. They're the most frustrating team to discuss because you see the potential. You see the talent, but it just has not come together. Maybe it will. They're on their bye week right now. Maybe it will. You never count that out. Bye week fixes, but we'll see relatively quickly because they play the Chiefs and the Ravens coming up. They play the Dolphins. So we'll see how they play in these next couple of games. But yeah, I don't see the ceiling too high because I just think their deficiencies that we've seen all year will eventually come back to burn them. So that's why I have them exiting in the divisional round. 41% have the wild card round. 48% say the divisional round. The other thing that goes the Texans' way is the fact that they will be, playing at home in the first game. That does help. Like, they destroyed the Browns in the first game in the postseason last season. So maybe the Texans at home is a thing in the playoffs. That's also something to account for. Our number 3 seed in the AFC is currently the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I have Steelers fans, once again. Oh, you're a hater. I can hear it already. Bring the comments. Just bring it. All right, we've got the Steelers exiting in the divisional round. I don't see you guys beating the Bills or the Chiefs. I'm sorry. I can't see it. I just can't see it. I'm sorry. I can't get myself to overcome the hurdle that is you guys with Russell Wilson and this offense beating Buffalo or beating Kansas City. I don't care where the game is. Pittsburgh. I don't care if it's on Mars. Like, I just can't see it, man. And honestly, if Pittsburgh plays, okay, so I don't know if Pittsburgh, currently they would be the 3 seed. There's a chance that Baltimore still wins the division because they play each other soon and Pittsburgh faces the Eagles and the Chiefs. So obviously their chances would go further down if they, for some reason, don't win the division. But let's say they win the division. Okay. They should be favored over the Chargers by like 3.5, right? It's probably going to be like a field goal game. That being said, we went over the theory of like, if it's a close game between 2 defensive teams and the last possession comes down to Justin Herbert or this version of Russell Wilson, I don't know. Like, they could lose that game, right? So the way Pittsburgh is playing, there's no reason to think that they shouldn't win a playoff game. So that's why I have them saying divisional round is probably most likely. Because if they have to go to Kansas City or Buffalo, they have to play Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. They have to play a Chiefs defense that's exceptional against the run. They have to play the Bills offense and keep pace with that offense with an exceptional O-line that can block their pass rush. Like, I just don't see how they win either game, to be fair. So that's why I have divisional round as probably the exit. Now, some people will say AFC Championship. I just don't know how that would happen unless they get the 2 seed. Unless they get the 2 seed, somehow the Bills fall to the 3 seed. And then, I guess Buffalo would go to Pittsburgh. I don't know, man. I think Pittsburgh would have a better chance against Kansas City because Kansas City doesn't really score that many points. So Pittsburgh could kind of hang in the game. And I don't know how that's going to happen either. So I'm kind of thinking, how are they going to get to the AFC Championship? Maybe I'm just completely underrating them. I just don't see them beating either of those teams, man. I just got to be honest. I don't. I think they'd have a better chance against the Chiefs. But the problem is I don't know how they would face the Chiefs until the conference championship. Unless they drop to becoming a wild card team, the Ravens win the division, and then they would face them in the divisional round, and they'd beat the Chiefs in Arrowhead on some defensive voodoo versus voodoo game. Tomlin voodoo, underdog magic versus Chiefs dark magic. They win the game, they go to the AFC Championship, then they lose. That's kind of how I see it. William says I'm completely underrating the Steelers. Maybe I am. I don't think that this offense is consistent enough. I don't think their passing game is consistent enough. I think that they pretty much, rely on George Pickens too much. Even the game against the Browns we just watched yesterday, the Browns miss multiple field goals. They against bad teams, they take advantage. Miss field goals, turnovers, they take advantage of that. But it's not like they go out there and they just put up an offensive masterclass. They didn't even put up more than 300 yards against Cleveland. I don't know, man. It's just the way the Steelers play. It's the way the Steelers play. And I don't think their defense is quite as dominant as their reputation either. Jameson, a snowball was still throwing it on them. So I don't know. Maybe I'm hating, but that's just how I see it. I think the Steelers are just kind of are what they are, which is a team that can win a playoff game, but I don't see them as a serious Super Bowl team. I just don't. I think they're limited in that capacity. Also, Mike Tomlin has not won a playoff game since 2016. He continuously gets here, but he doesn't win the playoff game. He just doesn't. This team, once upon a time, lost to Blake Bortles. All right. The number 2 AFC seed is the Buffalo Bills right now. Obviously, the Steelers could surpass them, or the Bills could actually still be the number 1 seed. That's possible. But the Buffalo Bills are the number 2 seed. And the furthest I see the Bills going is as Super Bowl champions. Now, that might look a little bit worse after they lost to the Rams. But I want to put that Rams game into context. That was a historical performance by the Rams offense. There was absolutely insane, ludicrous plays that happened in that game, especially by Puka Nacua and Matthew Stafford. And I honestly feel like in the AFC playoffs, there is no team in the AFC playoffs that I think could actually replicate what the Rams did to the Bills defense. Not a single team. In terms of throwing the ball with that level of explosiveness, precision, and consistency, and the ability to convert on third down the way that the Rams did. They were 10 for 11 on third down. The only team that could do that is maybe the Chiefs, in which case that would happen in the conference championship. But we've seen the Chiefs struggling to score. They don't have the playmakers that the Rams have. They don't have the balance that the Rams have. They don't have the explosiveness, especially that the Rams have with Matthew Stafford and these receivers and Sean McVay's play calling. Now, they have a much better defense. That's a different conversation. Their worst matchups for the Bills, I think the worst matchup is the Ravens. But the Ravens would have to run the ball, right? And even then, I could see a world where in Buffalo, it's bad weather. I don't think the Ravens would fare well on offense because of Lamar. And the difference between Josh and Lamar in that weather, I think would be pretty big because of the way they play and their ball handling skills, things like that, their accuracy, the ability to handle those elements, I think would be much different. On top of that, the Ravens do have flaws on defense. I think the Bills could take advantage of. But I think that's the worst matchup. I think the Chiefs always have the ability to beat the Bills because they've done it in the past. But when you actually look at the matchup this year, it was not very favorable to Kansas City. It would take a much better performance from their defense to be able to withstand the Buffalo Bills this year. That being said, the biggest flaws for Buffalo, defense, Sean McDermott, game management at the end of games, things like that. We've seen that before. Even McDermott not calling a timeout after the QB sneak. Why did he do that? He could have kept 3 timeouts, could have got the ball at the end of the game against the Rams, could have had another opportunity for Josh Allen to maybe win that game, go down the field, get a field goal range, basket kick a field goal. It was entirely possible if you don't call a timeout right there. McDermott just makes those boneheaded decisions. Their defense in the playoffs typically does have a letdown game. They would have to withstand that. They usually have one game where they don't play well. They would have to be able to overcome that. Now, can Josh overcome that? He did score 6 touchdowns against LA. They still lost, right? So they are capable. But that being said, the Bengals aren't in this field, and there is no team that throws the football like the Rams did, in the AFC. So making it to the Super Bowl would be something. Then you would have to face probably the Lions or the Eagles. The Eagles are a run-heavy team. The Eagles could be very physical. But that would be an awesome game because I think it would truly test run-heavy team against great quarterback. And then on the other side, you've got the Lions, who I think the Bills would match up better with the Lions just because I think the Bills would have a much easier time. We're going to see them play this upcoming week throwing the football. I think they'd have a much easier time throwing the football and scoring a ton of points. But we'll see how that matchup, that early preview of that matchup would go. And then obviously the number 1 seed right now is Kansas City. I can't deny the Chiefs' potential being Super Bowl champs. That being said, I don't think the Chiefs have a wider spectrum than I don't think they've ever had a wider spectrum of defeat than they have this season because they just play every game close and eventually the ball is going to bounce and it's going to doink out instead of doink in. Eventually that's going to take place. One of these games, it has to happen, right? They're going to fumble when they shouldn't. They're going to get a tipped interception when they shouldn't. They're going to get a block punt when they shouldn't. One of these times it could happen. One of these times, whether it be divisional round, AFC championship, it could happen, right? That being said, if they get the AFC running through Kansas City, it increases their chances. Because home field, that noise in Arrowhead is a big deal. It helps their defense drastically. And their defense lately has looked a little bit more flawed than last year. But Super Bowl champs is a possibility because you got Mahomes. You got Andy Reid. You got Steve Spagnuolo. You got Travis Kelce in the playoffs. You've got a decent enough running game. And you've got a good defense, especially against the run. I think Butker will be back, so that also gives you a great kicker, which against some of these teams is a big advantage. But explosiveness is an issue. Secondary is an issue. Tackle is an issue. There it is, guys. There it is. Kansas City. Obviously, most people think they can go to the Super Bowl. All right, let's recap. So in the NFC, we have the Washington Commanders as the 7 seed wild card exit. Number 6 seeded Green Bay Packers. NFC Championship loss. The number 5 seeded Minnesota Vikings. Divisional round loss. That one hurt me. Number 4 seed Tampa Bay. Divisional round loss. The number 3 seeded Seahawks. Wild card loss. Number 2 seeded Eagles. Super Bowl loss. And number 1 seeded Lions. Super Bowl championship. Okay? In the AFC, the number 7 seeded Denver Broncos. Wild card exit. Number 6 seeded Chargers. The divisional round is as far as they can go. The number 5 seeded Baltimore Ravens. The AFC championship. And a loss again is probably as far as they can go. The number 4 seeded Houston Texans. maybe a playoff win at home, and then they lose. Third-seeded Pittsburgh Steelers, I just don't see them getting past the divisional round. I'm sorry. The number 2-seeded Buffalo Bills, Super Bowl champions. They've got Josh Allen, probably the best quarterback in the league right now. Maybe the MVP. It can happen. And the number 1-seeded Kansas City Chiefs, a three-peat is as far as they can go, obviously, with what they've put forth in the playoffs and past. But they're more flawed than any Chiefs team I feel like we've ever seen in this era. So there it is, guys. AFC, NFC, how far can each playoff team go? It's Mitch. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.